Now, it's fairly low in Western Europe. Only about 3 to 5% of network operators are standalone yet. But in North America and in much of Asia Pacific, 25 to 30% of networks are already standalone. So we could see in the next year or two, more than half of networks in those areas have standalone. Why does standalone matter? Because standalone is necessary for delivering the full value of 5G. If you just want higher speeds to a handset, non-standalone is fine. But if you want new features, especially features such as ultra-low latency, super high device density, and especially network slicing, which is the creation of virtual private cellular networks as part of the, just like a VPN except cellular, those will be interesting revenue opportunities for carriers around the world. We, on the other hand, do want to caution. It is not trivial to deploy standalone. Standalone is a complex systems integration challenge. You've got to change gear. You've got to change software. You've got to test the systems. You have to change the culture. It is slow and expensive around the world. So it is something that keep your eye on, but it is not something that happens. It's not like flicking a switch. Now, I'm going to turn to my colleague, Piyush, who is going to walk us through the Indian implications for 5G standalone.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. I think, India has obviously been a very promising country where we actually rolled out 5G services a few months back. And today we almost have roughly around, 20 million subscribers latched onto 5G network. But I think the real acid test is when we really get to a lot more private networks, because while all the subscribers are on 5G, but it's not really yielding revenues to the operators. And operators are going to spend close to $10 billion in capex outside the spectrum costs over the next 3 to 4 years. So that's a significant cost. Having said that, I think the operators have really seen the potential, and they've really picked up almost 50 gigahertz of spectrum that was really auctioned out a few months back. We already have 5G in roughly around 200 cities. And but Duncan, as you rightly mentioned, I think we have a hybrid combination here, where we have a few operators on MSA and some on the SA network. And I think obviously some of the mission critical use cases in India, which Deloitte believes could be in the vicinity of healthcare, again something emergency response services, connected vehicles, industrial automation. I think these are some of the critical areas which India will latch onto, and India has no option but to latch onto it very fast, because of the fact that we need to see the revenues coming out of it, because the capex being pumped in so heavily. Having said that, I think on the private network side, I think captive non-public network license, I think we're still waiting for some of the guidelines to come in, and I think that will be a reality very soon. And the spectrum will get auctioned, which is going to be across the mid-band and the top end of the band of the spectrum. But I think very clearly the government is absolutely committed to give away at least 40 megahertz of spectrum for the private networks. And we see a good potential in this market, with close to 20 companies already applying for the CNPN license. So I think overall, the real test will come in when we have the private networks and the operators will start to see the revenues generating from the capex that they've done. And this will also involve a lot of collaborative ecosystem between the private network guys, between the industries, between the operators, because multiple models will really emerge. But I think we're really looking forward to the private networks, because that's where the money is going to be made by the operators on the 5G side. Right. Over to you, Duncan. Thank you.
Thanks, Piyush. One comment I do want to make is there was some research last year about the private cellular market, both 4G LTE and 5G, and it was a little bit smaller than we would have thought. It's about 1.6 billion. It is growing. People are expecting it to be larger and by 2026. But it is interesting that the private network market, at least so far, although it's growing, is growing perhaps a little more slowly than I would have forecast a couple of years ago. So something to keep our eyes on. But Piyush, I 100% agree with you. Every network operator I talk with around the world, in both North America, Europe, and Asia as well, is really excited about the opportunity of growing revenues through private networks. Given that consumers won't pay for 5G, somebody has to help offset those costs for spectrum and all the new equipment, and private networks may be one of them. Great comments from the Indian perspective. Next topic I want to cover is semiconductors. I've actually got a bunch of semiconductors. I'm the guy who writes a lot of Deloitte's semiconductor research, not just these predictions, but our global 2023 semiconductor outlook was published only 2 weeks ago. So when we get to the Q&A, you can ask me anything about chips. I'm the guy, and I'm happy to help out. But let's focus on AI and chip design. We're predicting this is not chips that do AI. This is like basically ChatGPT for designing chips. It is a series of powerful tools that do not replace human designers, but instead allow human designers to create better designs faster, cheaper, pushing Moore's law, and perhaps even alleviating to some extent the talent shortage. We're predicting this market will be 300 million this year, growing much, much faster than the overall chip industry at 20%. This is about laying out the actual physical circuit design, optimizing power, performance, and area, using new tools such as graph neural networks and reinforcement learning. This is a complex task. Laying out a chip has exponentially more possible arrangements than a game of chess or Go, but we are seeing real-world examples. This technology has gone from lab to fab in just a few years, and actual companies are demonstrating that they are able to produce chip floor plans that are better than experienced human designers in hours instead of weeks or months. Meanwhile, NVIDIA is another leading chip company, is also showing real-world example where these tools are allowing us to create chips faster and better. Where do we go from here? Keep following it. This tool will only get more powerful. Much of it is being done through the cloud. India has a large, well, we'll be talking more about this, but India has thousands and tens of thousands of chip designers who over time almost certainly will be using these tools. Next topic I want to discuss is the growth in, oh, hang on. Karthik, I think Karthik's actually taking this one, isn't he? There we go. Karthik, I'm glad. You and I have worked on this one, and I nearly stole it from you. My apologies in advance, but over to Karthik for this one.
All right. Thanks, Duncan. Great to be here today with you and everyone else. So this prediction is about the supercharged or compound power semiconductors. We all know silicon has long been the standard for making chips in our mobile phones, PCs, laptops, and data centers. But it's not well suited for new areas of applications, right, which are becoming more common. So just take the case of battery electric vehicles, consumer electronic chargers, electric trains, renewables, aerospace and military applications, because these require chips to handle hundreds or even thousands of volts. The good news is there are two specific compound semiconducting materials. They're also known as wide bandgap semiconductors, silicon carbide and gallium nitride. And these can handle high volts and temperatures. So that's what Deloitte predicts, that the revenues generated by these supercharged power semiconductors will grow almost 40% from 2022 to $3.3 billion in 2023, and further reach at least US $5 billion by 2024. Next slide, please, Duncan. Now, why does it matter? So why these compound semiconductors are important for chip industry? So one thing, first let's understand that silicon will continue to be the dominant chip type in the low power, low voltage applications, right? But these compound chips, they have specific advantages over traditional silicon. First, they help make systems to be smaller, more efficient, and they enable them to withstand higher temperatures and can operate at higher frequencies. For instance, take the case of a household power outlets that run at 120 or 240 volts, right? GaN chips are a great fit for that. In case of battery electric vehicles, where typically the inverter and motor systems, they run at 400 volts today, and they could be operating at 800 volts by 2025. Silicon carbide chips are more suited for these kind of applications. All in all, demand trends for smartphones, chargers, battery electric vehicles, solar, these will continue to drive demand for these new power semiconductor materials. And next slide, please, Duncan. We will now see what should companies do about it. First, we need new capacity, new fab manufacturing capacity need to be built. The good news is countries and regions already recognize the importance of these compound chips, and they're building out local manufacturing capacity. and it's pretty, evenly more spread globally and distributed. Second is there are some vital elements like gallium. They're found in a small number of possible sources and regions that presents manufacturing risks. So specific supply chain and national security issues need to be addressed. Third is the manufacturers have to develop customized design and production tools and packaging and test and assembly capabilities because silicon carbide and gallium nitride wafers have unique demands for it. And overall, if you look at it, these compound chips will remain niche, but the unique advantages over silicon implies that this niche market will most likely grow much faster than mainstream silicon chip. And back to you, Duncan, to talk about semiconductors for space and nuclear applications.
Thanks, Karthik. Just before I go any further, one of those things is that, you might make most of the world's advanced 3, 5 nanometer semiconductors in 1 or 2 or 3 areas, but you probably are able to distribute things like gallium nitride and silicon carbide across more manufacturing locations, such as, I don't know, Canada, or I don't know, maybe some other country like India. Anyway, let's talk about radiation-hardened chips in space and nuclear. Those are harsh environments with ionizing radiation. That ionizing radiation can either have chips that have errors, ones turning into zeros or zeros into ones. It can cause something called a latch up, which is very severe and almost a permanent error. But over time, radiation just damages the chips and they don't work as well. Historically, the chips that we've used in space and the nuclear industry have been decades out of date. They were made out of big, fat, ugly, slow transistors because those are the ones that handled radiation better. However, new technologies suggest that we can make a radiation-hardened electronics that are much more powerful for these markets. And we believe that's a $1.5 billion market this year. Why does this matter? Space economy will be through $500 billion US this year, growing at close to double-digit rates, maybe even faster than that based on some recent analysis I've seen. Meanwhile, nuclear power is 10% of global electricity production, worth $2 trillion annually. And historically, as I said earlier, the chips inside nuclear reactors, the chips up in satellites and higher orbits, the joke I always make is that a satellite in geosynchronous orbit is $2 billion with the best cameras in the world and the best sensors in the world and the best radios in the world, but has the processing capacity of a 1970s pocket calculator. I exaggerate slightly, but not much. The idea of putting more powerful processors in space is basically edge computing, significant impact on military technologies and national security. Do need to flag that. Doing more advanced analytics in space, in nuclear, could enable new generations of satellites, services, and nuclear technologies. Meanwhile, I'm going to flip now to Katir, my colleague from India, to take us through some of the semiconductor implications for the Indian market.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. So from a semiconductor perspective, India consumed USD $27 billion in 2022. And what we predict in the next 4 years, about 2x of the consumption to about 55 billion in 2026. Looking at a growing and large economy like India, which is significantly dependent on imports for their semiconductor, the government has come out with the production-linked incentives and design-linked incentives for semiconductor at a value of $10 billion. India is also trying to replicate what other countries said, the dependency of other countries like US and EU, which depends on, say, Taiwan and South Korea for chips, actually. So India tries to be self-reliant and therefore driving significant investments in the sector. With that in context, actually, a CAGR of about 20% growth is what is predicted to reach the 55 billion. And majority of the demand, 60% of the demand, is expected to come from 3 major industries. One is automotive, second one is smartphones and wearable, and third one is primarily on computing and data storage. Whereas other segments also would like significant growth, something like telecom network equipments. What we see here is actually, while India has been trying to build a semiconductor industry from starting, what we are going to see in the next 4 years is a strong strides towards the manufacturing, primarily starting with assembly, testing, marking, and packing, or outsourcing of semiconductor operations. So this will be having 2 elements: one on the R&D and engineering side, the second one on the manufacturing side. And this investment are expected to generate about 200,000 employment in India. This is in addition to what is currently existing, around 50,000. The critical elements for India to scale up in semiconductor industry, there are about four key dimensions. One is, as India plans it, the semiconductor investment, its focus would be on both domestic as well as export market, because covering for only domestic market would not provide a scale, and so therefore it becoming very critical for them. The second one is, actually it should not be only manufacturing investment. The focus should be on the entire ecosystem development, so that it becomes self-sustainable. The third dimension would be like collaborating with the countries that have significant manufacturing ecosystem, someone like US and Japan, actually, which will help us India to scale up fast. Within domestic market perspective, it will become imperative for the country to provide for the talent requirements, and therefore a structured program to skill development would be critical to reach the scale. So this is the key predictions from India perspective on semiconductor. Back to you, Duncan.
Thank you, Kadir. I will hit that collaboration point really strongly again. There's a quote from Ursula von der Leyen, president of the EU, where she said, "We have to understand that no nation, no region can be 100% self-sufficient. When it comes to semiconductor supply chains, we are always going to need to rely on our partners and our allies. It's just impossible for anybody to make every single part of the semiconductor supply. Even Taiwan and South Korea rely on others to large extent." So did want to flag that one. Shifting gears from some fairly technology-focused topics to media, let's talk about ad-supported video on demand. I feel kind of, I don't know, almost embarrassed to be talking about this topic on an Indian telecast, as the Indian market, of course, has embraced AVOD for years now. But what we're predicting is that the rest of the world is following India's lead. We're predicting that 2/3 of consumers will have at least one AVOD service, an increase over the prior year. We are predicting that all of, not some, not most, all 100% of major subscription video on demand services will offer an ad-funded tier. And we're also predicting by the end of 2024, half of those will have launched a free ad-supported streaming TV service. That's fast. So looking for a lot of changes in the developed world. What has historically been a subscription-only model increasingly will be moving towards a hybrid model. Now, why does this all matter? It's about reducing churn. In the developed world, in Western Europe, in North America, Canada, Australia, we are seeing very high levels of churn, with customers who had many services during the pandemic beginning to cancel them. The other thing is that adding AVOD, ad-supported video on demand, can generate additional revenue streams, possibly even grow the market, especially with younger, maybe lower income audiences. We are also seeing some possibly profound shifts in the digital advertising ecosystem. We are seeing that the cost per 1,000 impressions for AVOD could be over US $50. That's even higher than broadcast television has been achieving. So this could be a really big deal, billions and tens of billions of dollars, and a way for the streamers to grow their market, reduce churn, and increase profitability, and maybe even ARPU. There are challenges, don't get me wrong, but lots to focus on here as we see ad-supported video on demand. My colleague Jahil is going to take us through some of the Indian experience, which is interestingly almost the inverse of what we're seeing in North America and Western Europe. Jahil?
Yes, thanks, Duncan. Absolutely right. As Duncan said, India has been largely an AVOD market for many years now, and OTT currently accounts for between 7 to 9% of the Indian M&E market. However, India is also moving the other way. There is more focus and stress on generating more money from subscription. While the AVOD market will continue to grow and be dominant, SVOD will, we're predicting, go at a growth rate of about 19%, and AVOD will grow at about 16%. Many of you know that we are in a soft advertising environment, and that is leading to AVOD growing a little bit slower. But just like in the US, I think we are moving towards a much more of a hybrid system in India as well, a much more balanced between AVOD and SVOD. Uh, and a lot of subscription is actually in India coming from aggregation. 50% of all OTT consumers are being aggregated either through telcos or through mother OTTs, and I think this aggregation trend is likely to continue because 83% of OTT viewing in India is mobile first. So lots of changes happening in the ecosystem, and there's much more detail in the report as you read it.
I like the aggregation one, or bundling, and also what's the role of telcos? Can telcos, network operators, either mobile first or actually overall, can telcos have a role in maybe building up, basically recreating the cable bundle is sort of one of the things I'm hearing around the world. What's the role of the telco in all of this?
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, one of the areas that that historically streamers have avoided was live sports. They showed you movies and TV shows, but live sports was historically something they ignored. That is changing, and in size, up from 0 a few years ago. We are expecting that streamers will spend over US $6 billion on major sports rights, and I think it's actually going to be even higher than that this year. I think it might be 7 or even 8. You can see that this is going on in Europe, in the US, but also in India. So we are seeing tremendous growth from multiple players spending on this. However, there are some challenges. Now, first of all, why are they going after live sports? Answer: it's incredibly sticky. You can have a thing with streaming video where somebody subscribes for a month and binge watches all of the content that they want, and then they cancel. But you're not going to do that if your favorite football team or your favorite cricket team is continuing to play a match once a week. So streaming is a way, sports streaming is a way of attracting an audience and keeping that audience, reducing churn. Really, really important. One of the challenges, though, is it's technically harder. If I am a TV broadcaster, I have one signal and 1 million or 5 million or 10 million or 100 million people see it all at the same time. And we have solved those technical challenges of how to broadcast a high resolution sports signal to many people simultaneously. We have not figured that out with streaming. It is much harder. It is more complex, and you've got a lot of issues around. You don't want one person to know when somebody has hit for 6, and then somebody else finds 5 minutes later. It all needs to happen at the same time. Lots going on here. What do companies need to do? You need to put the fan first, expand the streaming sector's influence. Improve the technical aspects, really important. I mentioned that already. But also keep an eye on costs. Sports are expensive and they reoccur. It's not, when you make a TV show or a series, it's good for years as part of your library. Nobody watches sports events from 10 years ago. So a lot of interesting questions there. Obviously, my colleague Kashyap here has some great comments on what this means for India.
Thank you, Duncan. And I think I completely agree with you when you say on the stickiness part. Nothing compensates for the thrill of live sports. And that is why I think some of the forecasts here are completely driven, because the genre is very, very niche. We expect that the Indian sports industry will reach almost $100 billion by 2027. And just to note that, it's a 2x faster growth than the global market. Some of the key reasons why we believe that this is achievable is the government initiatives, some of the athlete performance at the international level, and the strongest pillar for India in live sports, which is cricket. So let me go first to the government initiatives. The budgetary allocation by the government in the sports sector has been increased in the 4 of the last 5 years, which certainly shows that the government has an intent to promote sports. One of the key initiatives, which was Khelo India initiative, it attracts almost 18,000 athletes in India, and it helps to identify the talent at grassroots level to groom them. So I think that is a very positive move from the government side. The second is that apart from cricket, what's happening with other sports? Now, if we look at the performance of some of our athletes in international sports like the Commonwealth Games and Olympics, we have given birth to new icons, whether it is Neeraj Chopra or Mirabai Chanu or Nikhat Zareen, and so many in other fraternity of sports. If we also look at the viewership data, there is an encouraging point to note that sports like kabaddi, wrestling, and soccer have also started picking up, though gradually. Undoubtedly, cricket is an undisputed champion, and let me come to that because cricket contributes almost 80% to the viewership of the entire sports genre in India. And when we talk about cricket, of course, we have to talk about IPL because that generates the highest revenue. But before that, let me also tell you how the ICC media rights has fared this year. The ICC media rights valuation has gone up almost by 50% to 3.1 billion US dollars. For IPL, if we notice, the extension of the franchisee has been done very, very successfully with the launch of women's IPL, which has gone for a very good amount of $116 million. The IPL has grown almost 5.5 times across the last three bidding cycles. Let me also tell you that though the viewership for IPL in the last season dropped marginally by almost 20%, it has not impacted the valuations. In fact, the valuations has gone up to a whooping 6 billion US dollars, which is record as on date. In terms of valuation too, also we should note that the sport is valued at 10 billion US dollars only after the US National Football League. So cricket being our religion, of course, is doing well, will do well. And the big thing to note is that this is the rise of digital. This is the first time where the rights for digital has been valued even higher than the television rights. And there is data to prove that the consumption of sports on digital is rising very fast. If we look at what Geo Cinema did on their app, which is for FIFA, it was streamed free of cost and which attracted almost 110 million viewers. We are just around the corner to see how the Geo Cinema app does this for IPL. And of course, we expect that there will be disruption in the industry. To keep focus on key five themes which I would like to share. One is that TV will still be relevant. Though digital is going to grow exponentially, TV cannot be ignored. The reason is India still lives in the villages and we still need to transition to the smart TVs. It's a long time, but TV will still be relevant. The second very important thing is that too much of cricket can cause something which we call cricket fatigue or genre fatigue, because of which there may be an impact on the ad pricing and it may slower the growth in the viewership or plateau. So we need to be very careful that yes, the advertising market and the advertising industry, we may see certain repercussions because how the industry is able to absorb such a high valuation needs to be seen. The third very important point is the increasing focus on sports infra and the ecosystem. So the government and India, we
Uh-oh. We seem to have lost. Oh dear. Okay. I'm gonna hang on a second here. Kashyap looks like he's coming back. I hope he's coming back.
The value chain, and it will impact the GDP, the technology companies, nutritionists, infrastructure, trainers, and so on and so forth. The game is just on. Let's wait and watch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One thing I do want to add, and I'm not sure how relevant this is in the Indian market, but we are seeing enormous growth in live sports betting. And that is a really big, really fast growing. Obviously, there's a debate about, is it safe and is it appropriate? But the sports betting market is just a huge thing worldwide. There are estimates that it is easily tens of billions, possibly even hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So that's both legal and illegal. So it sort of varies by market, but something to keep your eye on. Thank you so much for your comments there. Next one, battle for the enterprise edge. Okay, now we haven't talked about this yet, but there's a thing. I'm here at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. As soon as I'm done here, I'm heading over to MWC. One of the interesting technologies that we're seeing a lot of these days is what's called digital twins. So I have a version of my factory, of my plant, of whatever it is, my new building, my skyscraper. This is a massive data file, and I can make changes to both my digital and physical version and have them mirror each other. Processing a smart factory like that 10,000 kilometers away is slow, it's expensive, it may violate various laws around data privacy and data sovereignty. Data is not allowed often to leave a country. I need to put the processing power closer to the end user. That is called edge computing. We are predicting it will be growing at much, much faster rate than the overall IT or networking spending, 22%. It is a multi-billion, tens of billion-dollar market going to $100 billion market. What's most interesting about it, it is a large and growing market without a dominant winner yet. Maybe one day there will be the classic winner take most technology rule of thumb. But for now, all of the hyperscalers, communication services providers, equipment manufacturers, platform providers, and others are trying to fight for who gets to control this edge computing market. We're talking about billions of devices. Point three here, edge computing can help reduce network resources, cut transit costs, improve performance, and enhance enterprise control over data and applications. Lots going on here. More about AI, more about 5G driving the use of edge. But one point I want to make here, it's right there on the right-hand side in the bottom line. The edge computing business will likely rely on the successful development of partnerships, alliances, and ecosystems, and not any one solution provider. Not unlike semiconductors, it's not possible to go it alone in edge computing, and we are going to see a lot of mix and match and people working together, and that's a really exciting thing to keep an eye on over the next 12 to 36 months. Meanwhile, Gunjan is going to take us through what's going on in India with edge computing.
Thank you, Duncan, and thank you everybody who's joined this. I'm really thrilled to be here. Duncan has given a very good overview of edge computing, so I'm not going to get into that. But what we have tried to do here is, let's say, answer 3 questions very relevant for the Indian market, and I'll take you through those questions, maybe in the increasing order of difficulties. So the first one, we see a lot of optimism when it comes on the global stage in edge computing. And what do we see in India? Do we see a similar optimism, or do we see that Indians would lag behind when it comes to edge computing? The answer is the former, and it's a resounding answer. We see drivers such as 5G. My colleagues talked about 5G, especially standalone architecture, which one of the operators, pan-India operators, is implementing. We see the growth of private networks. And all of this, we see Industry 4 applications being talked about, and all of this will result in growth of edge computing in India. We also validated this as we talked to around 50 CIOs of various medium and large enterprises. And what we see in point number 2 on the slide is what we heard, that there is a significant shift, significant investment that will happen towards edge computing, and along 3 axes. One, to completely disrupt, if you're looking at new applications, new operating models. 2, for efficiencies, and last but not least, to enhance customer experiences in certain cases, right? So it's a resounding yes. The second one, which was relatively difficult to answer, which are those sectors where we see adoption in India being the first ones to adopt. And as we did our analysis, talked to folks around, we see automobile sector, manufacturing, and retail potentially being the first adopters. For example, in manufacturing, one could see a good visibility on logistics. One could see diagnostics at the production line. And we see large houses in India who might move towards that. Similarly, in retail, as everybody is fighting for the consumer wallet, we can see hyper-personalized offers, real-time marketing being targeted at the consumers. So these are the sectors where we see edge computing being taken up first when it comes to the Indian market. The third question, and maybe a really difficult one to answer, what's the operating model that we are going to see in the country? So very similar to what Duncan talked about, which is we haven't really seen CSPs, hyperscalers, system integrators, gear makers come together, but we'll see those unconventional alliances in the country happening to create these new offerings. What we might also see, and that's the bottom line, that's for India to really tap into. We have done this earlier when it came to the IT sector, to the application space. Can we do something similar in the edge computing application space as well, which is really emerge as a global hub? We talked about technology, something we have in abundance. We have talent in abundance, and we do have the cost advantage, right? So that's something to be watch out for on the edge computing space. Thank you so much. And I think now we are done with the business part of it. Let's now talk investments, which is very critical. So I'll hand it over to Karthik Ramachandran for that piece.
Just before you do, interestingly, on the edge computing, if you take a look at the US market, now I can't name individual companies. Thanks, Gunjan. Great job. I can't name individual companies, but we are already seeing some of the major US cloud providers and telcos partner up on the edge already. So this is not a thing that might happen one day. We are seeing those unconventional partnerships that Gunjan just talked about occurring in real time. Karthik, nice to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. Thanks. And thanks, Gunjan, for the presentation too. So now I'll be presenting the prediction on M&A and gaming, right? And so let's make a deal in gaming. That's what we're calling it. Now, video game companies are thriving, and so is the market for buying and selling those companies. If you look at it, a prediction is in 2022, the number of gaming deals accelerated. And for 2023, Deloitte Global predicts the number of game company mergers and acquisitions will increase by about 25%. Now, what's more interesting to note is a growing number of gaming deals will also likely bring the Western and the Asian gaming markets closer together, right? So you could also be India included. In 2022, a number of acquirers from US and European Union, they took stakes in Asian gaming companies to access Asian players and grab the intellectual property that has proved successful in the West. While the leading game companies in Asia, they acquired and also made some strategic investments in Western gaming assets. So gaming has really become global business, and game companies going up for sale now attract many of the suitors than just competing game companies. So whether we talk about video game companies, video streamers, or even hyperscalers, they're pursuing gaming M&A for talent, technology, intellectual property to expand their portfolios and quickly position themselves to access and penetrate more gamers in new markets. Next slide, please, Duncan. So why does M&A in gaming matter now, right? Now, following the COVID pandemic, with more and more people returning to public and going for in-person entertainment options, the engagement with games has continued at a healthy pace. And this is especially true among younger players, right, who more and more compete and socialize on multiplayer game services. They spend huge sums on in-game goods and content. For example, we found that from Deloitte's 2022 Digital Media Trends Survey of US consumers, almost all of the Generation Z, Millennials, and even Gen X respondents said they game regularly, averaging 11 hours every week. So many M&A companies, they're looking to expand their portfolios into gaming to keep the younger generations under their roof. Content will likely play a very notable role as more top gaming companies and leading hyperscale platform players, they seek to expand their portfolios and stake a claim at the convergence of media, IP, gaming, and the young metaverse, right? And especially the new Web3 native disruptors, they're gathering users around their early metaverse experiences. So these are quite important and tell us why gaming continues to matter from M&A perspective. So what should companies do about it? Next slide, please, Duncan. So first, when planning to acquire gaming companies, it's vital to understand the nuances and specifics related to the target customer segments, because a casual mobile gaming could be very different to multiplayer services or the AAA story-driven games. Second is, acquiring tools and technology should be very carefully considered because these have the potential to expand gaming opportunities and even cost-saving tech and unlock forward-looking business models. Third is, the gaming success is a huge drive of metaverse enthusiasm and the transformative Web3 protocols. Strategic acquirers should be thoughtful in building those key foundations. And speaking of studios and streaming video providers, those that have strong IP and can expand their cinematic universes into gaming, and that can allow them to access and expand their gaming audiences, unlock new monetization models, and even get ahead of the entertainment trends. Overall, film and TV studios, the major entertainment companies, hyperscale social and platform companies, private equity, all of them see opportunities in the gaming industry. While 2023 may bring many uncertainties, many leaders are considering M&A as a growth strategy, and they may view these uncertainties as opportunity to position their businesses for long-term success. With that, I'll now turn it back to Duncan.
Well, before we do, I want to remind everybody we are getting very close to the end of the formal part of. We do have more, but get your fingers ready. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A already. I see 3. We'd love to see more. We have a good amount of time set aside for Q&A. You've got me, you've got Karthik, you've got the full team from India here. So please do come up with some questions and ask them, and we'd be delighted to get to those. But I'm now going to, go back a slide. I'm now going to throw to Abhijit, my colleague, to take us through the, this isn't so much about M&A and gaming, it's about some sort of other M&A activity we see growing really rapidly in the Indian market. And one of these, agritech, I'm really excited about this one. This may be one of our 2024 predictions, not for India, but for globally. So over to you.
Thanks, Duncan. Thanks a lot, and good evening, everyone. As we get into FY23, right, we expect the funding and the M&A activity to bounce back and ramp up significantly in India. While the deal flow in gaming M&A is likely to accelerate globally, but in India, we are expecting the activity to be low in the gaming industry, and that's primarily because of the regulatory uncertainty and regulatory challenges that are there. It's still I would say, a controversy between a game of chance or a game of skill that is still being resorted to, and the state governments are still coming out with their regulations. We rather believe, right, in next coming years, in addition to IT services, which has been the cornerstone for M&A in India, 2 sectors will emerge as the key investment themes from a TMT standpoint. These are SaaS and agritech. SaaS would be software as a service. Software as a service has been the torchbearer from a digitization wave in India. You would have all heard about the India stack. That was the base level of SaaS that we would have created for the world problems to be solved. We expect that the SaaS sector will continue to grow. We are expecting it to become $75 billion worth of industry by 2026. The emergence of multiple unicorns in this sector and successful IPOs by certain India-based SaaS companies in the US have demonstrated the momentum the SaaS sector has gathered. VC funds have actually contributed a big way to the momentum of this sector. They have continued to invest, and some of the subsectors, as we have been talking about earlier, also have been automation, have been cloud native products, as well as verticalized SaaS solutions. These will continue to see interest from the investors. One other sector which we believe, as Duncan mentioned, is going to be the next sunrise sector for India is agritech. Around 20% of India's population still continues to be dependent on agriculture, and a large part of the economy continues to be dependent on agriculture. And our prediction is that this will be the next sunrise sector. This agritech has the ability to kind of cater to scalable social and economic impact. Investor enthusiasm will continue to be seen in this sector, and some of the areas within agritech which we expect to kind of show more interest would be precision agriculture, post-harvest, agri-marketplaces, and supply chain technologies. Overall, we believe that investment in these 2 sectors, SaaS and agritech, would actually outpace the investments in traditional IT, or which we have been calling IT services, which has been the cornerstone in the last couple of years in India. That's it from our side. Duncan, back to you.
Thanks. I was at CES, Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January, and I saw some fascinating equipment being used for that precision agriculture, where you can weed with robots and use less pesticide, use less weed killers. But the other one was, putting just the exact amount of fertilizer in with the seed when you plant, once again, reducing the need for excessive amounts of fertilizer and leading to problems in runoff. So precision, very interesting there. Now, speaking of CES, I do want to flag this here. You might want to reach out or follow me. You don't have to connect. You can just follow me on LinkedIn. And by so doing, I am frequently around the world, not just hosting events like this, but I am at CES in Las Vegas. I am here in Mobile World Congress. I'm looking at my watch right now. As soon as I'm done this call, I have to jump onto the metro and go to Mobile World Congress, where I'm going to be reporting live from the show floor with some of my Deloitte colleagues, featuring what's hot and what's not at CES, at Mobile World Congress 2023. So do connect with me if you're interested in. So thank you all. I'm now going to throw it back. I can't remember who's running the Q&A session, but here we go. I'm going to stop presenting, and now we have time for Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Duncan. And we do have a few questions in the chat. And let me start first with one on semiconductors. Maybe Duncan, throw it at you first. The question is from Manikanda Prabhu, and I'll just read it out. It says, we see that the fab projects that are announced in the market are for 28 mm nodes. Do you see advanced nodes like 7 nm and 5 nm coming to India in the next 5 years?
So that's a really fascinating question. And I'm also interested, of course, in my colleague from India's response on this. But globally, there's a few stats I need to give to set some context. So currently, when we look at advanced node fabrication, that's 3, 5, 7, anything under 10, that's actually only about 8 or 9% of global semiconductor manufacture. It's really important. It's important in computers. It's important in phones. It's important in data centers. But it's not the whole market. As a matter of fact, 65 nanometer nodes and above represent 2/3 of all the semiconductors today. So as exciting as it is to talk about a $25 billion 3.5 nanometer fab in South Korea or Taiwan or the US or Europe or India, that's only a small part of the market. The other point I would want to make, and I really need to flag this to the folks on the call, it's unclear just how desirable it is to have an advanced node fab. They cost way more money than any other fab. The chips that go into those are not the ones needed in cars and agriculture and stuff like that. They also don't employ as many people as you think. There might be 2,000 people working in one of those fabs, and that's not many jobs for a lot of money. But one of the other problems is that a trailing edge fab, you build it once, you can run it for 15 or 20 years without changing the technology. Whereas if you've got an advanced node fab, 3.5 nanometers, you have to change the technology inside every 2 to 3 years to stay current. So little bit of a debate there. I'm not trying to answer the question. I'm trying to provide globally, every country that's thinking about advanced node is facing these kind of challenges. Is it worth the $20 to $25 billion per fab? Do we have any commentary from my colleagues?
Duncan, probably I'll step in. In a sense, you answered the question without being in India, but that's true. So I think there are 2 or 3 things which play. One is, of course, it's a more glamorous, the 8 nm and below is more glamorous play, so people want to be there. But outside of that, what is the workhorse is the 30 plus and the 65 plus. So, and that's where we will head to. You talked about investment. Yes. Second is it's not very easy to get into 8 nm fab. The technological backing that you need is immense. So it's not someone who starts off new can start off with an 8 nm. You start off somewhere else and then move into the leading edge. So that's number 2. But I think importantly, we try to align in a sense because we are a bit late to this semiconductor game, right? So we're trying to align towards the government of India has created a Make in India with whole lot of incentives for various sectors. So since semiconductor is a product that's consumed for the larger device or the larger display system, wherever, they'll probably align it to a larger usage. So it could be electric vehicles, it could be renewable sector, it could be power fabs. So it could be more oriented towards those wherein there is a coherent production or Make in India strategy, manufacturing strategy. So all these together, I would believe that the leading edge fabs are a little away. Where we would start with more would be the trailing edge. Jahil, back to you.
Thank you, Sudarshan. I'd just like to remind the audience that there is a Q&A tab where you can post your questions. We have a few coming in. We do have about 10 minutes for questions, so please do post your questions. The next question is on live sports, and maybe I'll take that myself. I'll just read the question. It says, for live sports, Facebook and other such players are now competing for digital rights for the likes of La Liga, etc. How do TV broadcasters like Star, Sony compete with them given the rapid growth and usage of the internet in India? So yes, you're absolutely right that this question is from Karan Shah, that their last couple of bidding rounds for live sports, we have had the likes of Meta and Google consider placing bids. But as you know now, digital rights and broadcast rights are bid on separately. That being said, which has unlocked a lot of value. So earlier, they were bundled together. So there was a single bidding for, let's say, IPL a couple of rounds ago. But now the digital rights and the broadcast rights increasingly are being split, unlocking value. With the likes of other players competing like these internet companies, the pricing of these rights will go up, which is great for the ecosystem because that money then flows back down into the sports ecosystem through the associations like BCCI, down to the teams, down to the grassroots. A lot of it flows down to developing teams, etc. So there will be a rise in the prices of sports, which will lead to the development of the sports ecosystem. But at the same time, given that the streaming system in India is still developing, broadcasting rights will continue to be the mainstay of viewership, at least in the short to medium term. Given the technological challenges along with streaming, I think that will continue to stay. So if Duncan or Kashyap, you want to add anything, please jump in.
No, Jill, that's good.
Okay. I will jump to the next question. There are around 48 SA commercial launches till now globally and around 100 expected by 24. Real benefits of 6G can be achieved only on SA, and hence it will be mandatory in the next 5 years. Early movers will surely have an advantage. Now, this is more of a comment, not a question, but
So maybe I'll take this up, Jill. Thank you so much. So I agree with you that obviously we are a little more nascent stages on 6G. And I think we spoke about the fact that it takes 2 to 3 years to really move from an NSA network to an SA network. And I think some of the operators, obviously the strategies are different, but there are logics to why some of the operators have picked up an NSA network. Because current use cases really are more around enhanced mobile broadband. It could be the consumer side. It could be the fact that, things like remote learning, AR, VR, 5G in large-scale events, etc. I think these are some of the use cases that are coming up now. So it makes more sense to be on an NSA platform. And then over a period of time, I think operators will choose to move into an SA network. So I think different strategies for different operators, but I think there's still room for everybody at this point of time. And over a period of time, we totally agree that operators will move into an SA network. There's no doubt about it.
I also would push back a little on the idea of early mover advantage and moving to standalone. We're not seeing that worldwide. Various operators are moving to standalone, some faster, some slower. None of them have really gained a significant in-market advantage versus peers by moving to standalone, at least yet. So I'm going to push back a little on that comment that there is a first mover advantage. I don't see the data supporting that.
Sure.
Just to add to that, typically, I mean, when you take the Indian example, there are two telcos that are deploying 5G, Airtel on the non-standalone mode and Jio on the standalone mode. Typically, as seen worldwide, the focus is on the enhanced mobile broadband cases. So when we talk about the B2B or the private network kind of offerings, right, telcos themselves are still evolving these offerings, which could essentially extend the use cases to more machine type, to more ultra low latency and reliable communication type use cases, right? So as those use cases come into being, of course, you will unlock the full potential of unfettered 5G, right? So at this point, because those are still not readily explored in the market or readily deployed in the Indian context at least, the kind of advantage that a standalone network would see remains to be seen. And like Piyush mentioned, of course, as it's not a binary choice, eventually every telco will move on to standalone, right? So that would eventually happen. But this time lag not necessarily is giving an advantage, because the ecosystem around the private networks, the use cases that would actually give that advantage is still developing.
Okay, thanks, Aditya. Next, we go to a question on agri-tech from John Prakasha. What are the current gaps in the agri-tech space that Deloitte sees? I'm assuming that this is, I think looking for, are there any white spaces still in agri-tech that are not being addressed? Abhijit, do you want to take that?
Jed, I can take that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so in agri-tech, the entire area is white space as of now, right? Which is just a very nascent stage where it has started developing. I think agriculture has been primarily a very manually driven kind of a sector with less tech intervention. But as we getting along now, we are seeing large platforms coming in place, large SaaS companies and solution providers are coming in place, which are helping connect the farmers to the larger consumers, as well as solving issues of the farmers, which are like precision farming, post-harvest storage, things like supply chain technologies and stuff like that, right? So what we are seeing and what we saw in manufacturing probably in 80s and 90s and then early 2000s, we are seeing now in agri-tech. And therefore, our belief is the agri-tech boom is supposed to come in next a decade or so. And that's where pretty much all the areas within agri-tech currently are, I would say, white space.
One comment I would mention in here is that there is a debate in the agriculture community about agri-tech, specifically when it comes to advanced farm machinery. Historically, these machines cost tens, even hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you bought them once as a farmer or farming collective, and you could repair them over time. If something broke, you repaired it, sometimes yourself. These more advanced agri-tech ones are much more complex, and there is no right of repair. So there was a challenge, there is continuing to be a challenge, that the people who make the farming equipment love the agri-tech stuff because it gives them control over their own machinery for decades. But some of the farmers don't like that. And they were worried that the total cost of ownership will in fact be higher. So I do want to flag that some farmers are pushing back on agri-tech in some interesting ways.
Yeah. So I think one of the, I think we're on the hour, so let me be very quick. What we would see in India more likely, and Abhijit stated it, it's a very wide, absolute white space. It's a virgin market in a sense. But we would see, Duncan, to what you said, we probably would see more of distributed deployment in India. It's not going to be large capital acquisitions by individuals. We'll probably have aggregators who will deploy them in different places. So we will see more models apart from just the agri-tech. We would see a lot of business models emanate out of this agri-tech space. As we get more and more advanced in agriculture, the dissemination of the agriculture to a large and distributed farmer group in India, many of whom will not have the financial bandwidth or the operational bandwidth to take it up, we would actually see a deployment mechanism that would spawn a set of businesses too. So agri-tech becomes wider and wider in its application as we move forward. Back to you, Jay.
We're on the hour, but I'll take one last question on streaming and then wrap up. It says you spoke about the streaming wars. How do you think the AWOD versus SWOD strategy shape up in India with the evolving consumer behavior? The India market has always been cost conscious. Yes, you're absolutely right. The India market is very cost conscious, and but I see India moving towards a much more of a hybrid model. SWOD will continue to increase. AWOD will also keep going up. We already put out the growth figures. But SWOD, there is a significant chunk of consumers in India who do want an ad-free experience, willing to pay for it. As a percentage will remain small, but in any global context, that is still a big number. ARPUs will remain low and challenging, and a lot of premium folks will gravitate down in terms of the price ranges, but the number of SWOD consumers will continue to grow. So just like the US is moving towards AWOD, India will move towards SWOD, largely through an aggregation model through the telcos or larger OTTs, and we'll settle at some sort of a hybrid situation. So I hope that answers your question. There are a couple of other unanswered questions that we'll try and address over email, but unfortunately we are at time. And I want to thank Duncan, all my co-panelists, from India. Thank you for sparing the time, Duncan. I know you're in Barcelona and then heading off to MWC. And thank you for all the attendees. Thank you.